Hello and welcome to The Real Crush on the Comic Crush. I'm your host, Paul. We're here doing the very final episode of our Indiana Jones series. So we're up to Dial of Destiny, which myself and my co-host Keith, who you'll be seeing again in a minute, both were lucky enough to see early, but at sort of slightly separate screenings. We were there on the same day, but just at different times. Just a quick word about the Comic Crush. We're a independent comics and film website that you can find on the web, obviously. We do have a Patreon and a web store. If you buy anything from the web store or sign up for the Patreon from just £2 a month, less than the price of a cup of coffee, you are supporting me and supporting the website. And just helping us keep going. So please consider doing that if you like what we do. Really pleased with the audience who've been watching our Indiana Jones specials so far. Remember, you can find all 4 episodes by the time you see this on the channel. We had so much fun doing these, all for the lead up to this film. So now you're going to get to see what we thought of Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. So let's get Keith on. Hello.
Hey, how you doing?
I'm good, man. Thanks for doing this again.
Here we go again. Yeah, no, it's cool.
The last one, and probably the last time we'll be talking about a new Indiana Jones film.
Yes, I guess. of this guy's anyway, but yeah.
I mean, we'll get into that, I'm sure, as we go. We're going to be on for the next sort of hour or so. I'm going to try and keep it fairly brief, because
I'm not good at fairly brief, Paul. You know this.
Brevity is the soul of wit, Keith. Yes. But I want to keep it fairly brief, just because I do also want to get your opinion on The Flash.
Okay.
Which sadly we couldn't have you on the episode just a few days ago that Liz, Rob, and I did. And I would like to hear your. But I know you're chomping at the bit to talk about it. But let's talk about Indiana Jones. I mean, obviously expectations. Well, here's the thing, Keith. I don't know if expectations were high for this film, largely because the last movie was 2004. We talked about that in our last Indiana Jones episode. Last movie was 2004, was it, or 2007?
It was 2008, I believe.
2008. Okay, completely wrong.
Because I was like, bloody hell, was it that long ago? But yeah,
so, it's been 13 years and
a hot minute.
Yeah, it's been a long time. And a lot of people were saying in the lead up to this film, as they were putting out the trailers, right from the time the first sort of teaser hit, that they didn't feel there'd be an audience for this film anymore. I think the opening weekend has kind of proved them wrong, or the opening day rather, because we're recording this on a Thursday. It opened yesterday in the UK. We saw it the week before last.
Yeah, we saw it on the 20th.
Yeah. So, I mean, let's kind of talk about that for a minute.
Okay.
Because one of the problems I had with Crystal Skull, one of the things I talked about as to why I felt the film wasn't as well received as it should have been, was that the audience had moved on so far in terms of action films from the last Indiana Jones film before Crystal Skull in 1989. And now we're kind of, 13 years on from that. 14 years on? 13 years on? 15 years on? How many years has it been? 2008. So 2018, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 15 years from...
Yeah.
From...
And they've jumped, 12 years in the Indiana Jones timeline. So,
which I'm glad I'm glad they did, because it allowed them to do some very interesting stuff, which hopefully we'll kind of get to. But I also read that this movie has cost them nearly $300 million to make.
Yeah,
and I don't see how any film
Yep.
of this ilk, even with a great actor like Harrison Ford, even with the cast it had, even with the action it has, even with the director it has, great director James Mangold. I'm not sure how you're recouping that.
No, I think this is a very uphill battle to actually, you know, it's not the only one. There's a lot of films this summer that are suffering from the same thing. The budgets have gone ridiculously high on these films because of, you know, management problems with studios and rewrites and reshoots and
COVID,
CGI, visual effects. All of this stuff becomes incredibly costly.
We can't forget COVID, really.
Yeah.
Because that would have caused a massive impact. But there does seem to be an audience there. I think it's been around 65 million for the opening day or opening couple of days. I don't know how much that will tail off, but I think it's kind of interesting to look at this series of films. So I don't want to use the word franchise because I hate that word. This
the Indiana
series
Jones
of
film series, yes.
Yeah, and it's just like, well, I just think that I actually felt that there wouldn't be a big enough audience for it. I think a lot of it is going to be dads introducing their kids to Indiana Jones.
Yep.
Or dads who have recently introduced their kids to Indiana Jones. How do you feel? Did you? Yeah. I mean, I know you were excited about this, right?
Yeah. I mean, I tried to avoid. Obviously, they did something sort of unprecedented. They had the a month before its release, they had the screening at Cannes, and they even lifted the press embargo a month early, which was kind of a bizarre move, I think.
Very confident.
I think they were hoping it would be another Top Gun Maverick, because that's kind of a similar thing that happened with that film. And I tried to avoid it like the plague because I just didn't want to know. And this is why I'm sort of glad we're doing this today, because obviously I saw it now, 10 days ago. I was, you know, thank you, BAFTA. I was very fortunate to get invited to these early screenings of these things.
Yeah, and for my part, thank you to Disney for letting me into the press room.
No, absolutely. No, I feel very, very privileged to have done that. But I've also since had time to reflect on the film. And what I've tried to do desperately today and yesterday is just avoid the internet, because no doubt most of the channels that I follow or listen to and podcasts and all this sort of thing have no doubt got reviews of this up. But I don't even want to see a thumbnail at the moment, because I just don't want anything until we've had the chance to have this conversation to sway or swing my opinions and my thoughts on this, for the better or worse. You know, okay. There's a lot of, as we all know, there's a lot of vitriol out there about things, about entertainment in general. And I had my experience when I watched it, and how I feel about it, you know, a week or two on now, having reflected on it, and I have thought about it, and I've had people ask me, you know, oh, is it good? Should I go and see it? And I don't want to ruin it for people, so I've just sort of said to them, yeah, go and see it. You know, and I've just left it at that, and haven't sort of given any real opinion of mine.
So I've been asked, like yourself, a lot. What's it like? How was it? You know, and my response is, I really enjoyed it, but there's going to be an element that I think will divide the audience and will upset people. And a lot of people have taken stabs at what that is. No one's really guessed correctly what that thing is.
Yeah.
We are going to talk about it in this show. This will be a full
we're going to spoil
episode.
This, right? That's the point of doing this now. And
so I hope if you've got this far into the episode, you've either seen the movie, or if you want to see it and haven't, go see it. Put us on, you know, turn us off, and then come back to us. once you've seen it. But I do hope you'll come back and watch.
Once you've watched our other episodes, obviously.
Yeah, of course, all 4 episodes.
Because again, it's been a complicated journey so far. I mean, this part wasn't. I've got my holy trilogy, pun intended. My holy, there for a reason. So
I don't
just to promote the home media.
So. I don't think that. As I said in that episode, it's all there, so I'll just be really brief. I don't think Crystal Skull deserved the vitriol that it got. I think there were issues with it, but I don't think it deserved that vitriol. This, I think, is another one that quite possibly is going to be due for some vitriol, but actually will benefit from the fact that people seem to hate Crystal Skull so much. Because I think regardless of quality, people are going to go into this thinking, oh, well, at least it's not Crystal Skull. And I think that actually may colour some of the reactions. So, I mean, right away, we're definitely in the modern era with this film. As with Crystal Skull, which was accused of some very dodgy CGI, you've got visual effects really pushing the forefront of this film as well, because we're at the opening of the film is set at the end of World War II. We've got a de-aged Harrison Ford. We've also got a new character called Basil, who is a kind of fellow professor of archaeology, but not quite as adventurous.
Yeah, we love Toby Jones, though. We always want to give a good shout out to Toby Jones.
Actor.
What a career that man's had, and we like him. We like him a lot.
He is a terrific actor, and it's always fun to see him. And I think he plays his parts beautifully. He's very endearing as an actor.
Yes, I would
agree. And I think he makes you believe, he makes you care about him primarily, no matter what he's doing, and within that makes you therefore believe what he's doing, and that I think is key to a lot of his success, really. And he was great in I mean, sort of pop culture film watchers will remember him from where are you going, Keith? You've disappeared.
Oh, sorry. I was literally just scribbling something because I'm really bad for making notes. I don't do it, and something just popped in my head, and I thought, "Oh, I need to make a note of that."
I don't have to send an archaeologist to look for you.
Yeah.
So, Toby Jones, you like pop culture film watchers will remember him from Captain America: The First Avenger, and of course in voice form, Captain America: Winter Soldier. Both of which he's great in, but he's done plenty of other stuff.
I first saw him on stage at the Amida Theatre.
Really? What's the play?
You know, I'm trying to remember what the play was. It wasn't a famous play. It was a new piece of new writing at the time, and it was him and Andrew Lincoln. And what's interesting is it was right before both of them as actors suddenly had this Hollywood explosion. I mean, they were both obviously established film and TV actors in the UK, right? But it's funny. It's really sort of the last 15 to 20 years that they've kind of had that explosion in the US. Obviously, Andrew Lincoln with Walking Dead, you know, launched him into the zeitgeist there as far as that goes. And like you said, Toby Jones has been involved in a lot of you know, again, I know you hate the term, but franchises
sure,
you know, since with Marvel and things of that nature. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah, and we moved into this kind of great action sequence. Did you enjoy the kind of de-aging stuff and the action sequence that came from it?
Well, all right. Well, I mean, I'll say yes. Well, okay. Here's the thing, right? There was I'm sat there with some major nitpicks right from the get-go. All right, because I like to me, I always equate Indiana Jones to James Bond. Yeah, you know, kind of, and I like, you know, if James Bond didn't have a gun barrel thing at the beginning, which they have messed around with in some of the later films, right? it kind of irritates me, because that is part of the setup going in, knowing you're going to see a Bond movie. Yeah, you have the gun barrel, right? And what annoyed me right from the get-go here is we get the Paramount logo, even though this is a Disney film. They're good enough to, give it's probably some contractual thing, but we get the Paramount logo followed by the Lucasfilm logo. And I'm like, hold on a second. Every one of the other Indiana Jones films starts with the Paramount logo and it transitions into a shot from the film, right? So that annoyed me right from the get-go. The other thing that annoyed me is all of the other films straight away tell us where and when we are. They put up the year and the location, right? Didn't get that in this film. So already we've got John Williams music, which is great. We've got Harrison Ford de-aged, which for the most part looked great and worked great. But I'm there thinking, bearing in mind, this is even a post-production thing, and I'm there going, Mangold and team, what are you doing? This straight away, you've missed one of the fundamentals. I mean, yes, we do get the map, with the plane and everything later on in the film and everything. But straight away, I was like, they're not setting this up like it's an Indiana Jones film, and it bothered the shit out of me. I'm sat there annoyed about this during what is a really good opening sequence, and I did like it. There were one or two places where the de-aged Harrison Ford, it looked great, but in a couple of places it entered uncanny valley. And also there were a few times when I could hear old Harrison Ford with the young face.
Right.
The voice, they didn't really, or maybe they did change the voice, but there were a couple of lines where it didn't seem quite right. But it still looked pretty good, and it was a very gripping and interesting intro to the film, which obviously the series is famous for, and this didn't let it down from that point of view.
Yeah, and we're introduced to a lot of concepts at the beginning, a lot of characters. We're introduced to Mads Mikkelsen's character Schmidt, who's not called Schmidt at the beginning. He reveals his name to be something else much later on. We're introduced to the Dial of Destiny itself, although I'm not sure. Does anyone refer to it as the Dial of Destiny in the film? I'm not sure. It's like it's Archimedes' dial.
Archimedes' dial, yeah.
Yeah, which I've not had the time to actually kind of look at to see if it was a real thing.
I still think it should have been called the Wheel of Fortune and Glory.
Well, and we're also kind of given a glimpse into how Mangold is going to handle the rest of the film, because it's very fast paced.
Yes.
Like all Indiana Jones, it's a very long sequence. I mean, it's an incredibly long sequence.
Yeah,
really.
Okay, here's the thing. I think we said on the last, I mean, I love James Mangold's work. I've liked him right back from, some of his earlier works like Identity and Copland and stuff like that. I've enjoyed, 3:10 to Yuma, Walk the Line, Ferrari, and all of those things have been really good. Obviously, I liked Logan a lot, the last Wolverine film and all this. So I've got a lot of respect for James Mangold. I think he's a very, very good filmmaker. However, I don't know whether I think part of me wanted him to pay more homage to Spielberg. Yeah. Sure. What I missed with this is, again, I've only seen it the once and I haven't gone back to analyze it, but it felt a lot more cutty and close up than Spielberg style. Spielberg being the king of, staging scenes to be essentially like a oneer, but obviously go from a wide shot to a close up without cutting and all of that stuff, which obviously all of the films so far in this series have been, directed by him and had that style. And I was trying to look at scenes where, but obviously I was into the narrative and just trying to follow the story and everything. So I was trying to not pay too much attention to the camera and the editing, but there were a couple of places where I felt, I think they're trying to do a Spielberg there, but not really. So I don't know. I need to watch it again really to comment better on that.
I completely agree with you. You were spot on about Mangold's style. It is much more of a cutty style, at least for this film. But one thing I think he is good at that we start to get into. So just for the audience, it becomes a fight for this one piece of this Dial of Destiny, Archimedes' dial. Schmidt, the scientist, is determined to get it. Much like Indiana Jones, he is a form of archaeologist working for the Nazis. They're on a train that is known as a plunder train. So basically, it's the Nazis knowing that they're kind of on the downward spiral of the war and losing, plundering a castle in Germany for its works of art. Sorry, is it a castle in Austria? I can't remember where they were.
Again, they didn't put it up, Paul, so I have no idea. I mean, that's one of the things that, as I said, distracted me a little bit. It was like,
they're going through the Alps. So actually, I think it's France, isn't it? They're in.
Can't remember.
Yeah, I think they're in France. But you're absolutely right. If we had known. But yeah, essentially, on this plunder train, it becomes a battle for this dial. And Indy and Basil escape with that piece of the dial. Schmidt is presumably killed, but as we find out later on, not. And we then take this gigantic leap forward from the end of the war to the day of the moon landing, or the day after the moon landing, right? I mean, and we meet Indy, as he's now known. He's Henry Jones. You know, he doesn't go by the name Indy anymore. He's living in a kind of crappy 1-bedroom apartment. He's a drunk. He's clearly without Marion. He's bereft. He's very sad. He's grieving for a reason we find out later.
Yeah.
And it's 1969, which of course, you know, it's for America back then, you're dealing with the onrush of the future.
Mm-hmm.
I think Britain had kind of embraced pop culturalism then.
Mm-hmm.
And it was the music, the swinging 60s, even though that was coming to an end then. For America,
I think they start with a song from the Beatles, don't they?
Yeah.
In that scene where they introduce him. So yeah.
And America instead embraced a kind of, you know, the American exceptionalism, the kind of great onrush to the future, and for lack of a better term, exploration. Indy is retiring from the university he's working at. It's his last day.
Yeah.
He gets given the obligatory gold clock. But he's also being pursued. He doesn't know it, but he is being kind of pursued and watched by these sort of villainous American agents, which I found quite kind of interesting, because I think it's the first time we've kind of seen that in the series, where it was kind of Americans aiding and abetting the villains of the film, because the villains in Indiana Jones films are all, for lack of a better term, foreign. They're all foreign agents. It's you know, it's Mullah Ram in the second one. It's obviously the Nazis and Belloc in the first. The third, the Nazis again. The full film is of course we've had Donovan, I guess, but the full film is the Russians, and of course we're now back. Sorry, and his own mates, and now we're back into kind of the foreign villain, which is an element of pulp kind of serials.
Yeah,
you know, the bad guy will always be, you know, from another country.
Mm-hmm.
And you can read into that what you will. We actually have a person of color in an Indiana Jones film for the first time, which I don't think I've seen before, apart from, of course, the Indian actors and Short Round in Temple of Doom. But he's being pursued, and we also get to meet Helena, who is, who, as it turns out, his goddaughter. Now, the problem I had was going in, I thought Helena was going to be the goddaughter of Marcus Brody, or going to be the daughter of Marcus Brody, or granddaughter of Marcus Brody. And instead, she is the goddaughter. She's the daughter of this character
we've never met or heard of before until
so it is. It becomes a bit of a kind of tenuous connection, I think, for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, I was sat there thinking, oh God, maybe I've missed the point here, because as I said, I really enjoyed the opening. Although I will say that the opening, not just Ford's face, but the rest of it looked quite CG and stuff, like the stuff on the top of the train. Action-packed and it's exciting as it was, I did not buy for a second that anybody was actually stood on the top of a moving train, unfortunately.
And also very, very difficult to do with an actor of Ford's advancing years, respectfully.
But then, when we cut to 1969, I just sort of thought, and I was sat there thinking, oh, maybe I'm missing the point. Maybe this is the point to the story. But I sat there and I thought, here we go. Obviously, 12 years earlier in the previous film, we see Indy happy, married Marion, found his long lost son and connected with him, and, goes off, not quite into the sunset like Last Crusade, but in a happy place. And then in this one, we get him, going to sign the divorce papers from Marion on his own. We don't know about Mutt yet, but he's on his own. He's broken and whatever. We have another thing where the picture of Marion is a fucking publicity still from Raiders of the Lost Ark on the fridge that he puts the fridge magnet over her face. Yeah. Again, why can't with CG and all this AI technology now? Why can't they?
I'm gonna call you on that, because I believe in Raiders of the Lost Ark we do see someone on camera taking pictures of Marion.
Oh, when they're on the roof.
Yeah.
And
I think that's where that's
her market dress, isn't it? She's wearing.
I can't remember.
Photo.
Anyway, I mean, I share your kind of agony over sort of bad production issues like that.
Things like that. But the other thing that really, I don't know, it kind of upset me, if I'm honest, is we get the lecture scene, right? And I know the whole point is the world's moved on, and maybe Indiana hasn't, but in the other films, the class loved him in many ways, but they all hung on every word he said and was attentive and gave him attention when he was a young man then. But here, well, I mean, I've been a teacher, so I know what it's like. None of them were listening to the lecture. It's kind of how I felt. But
you are right in the sense that the point there is that the world's moving on to the future, and it's not interested in the past anymore. And I think that's a point that's made again, because once he meets Helena, and she explains that she's after the piece of the dial, and what she believes to have been lost in a river, in this opening sequence. And is then revealed not to have been lost. It is in fact hidden by Indy. There follows this sequence where murders take place by the American agents. And there also seems to be one German or Russian agent there as well, the gigantic, huge guy, which I thought was a nice touch, because it's again a throwback to kind of Pat Roach appearances
Oh yeah,
we'd see in those films. And I think what's interesting about this is they show the advancing years on Harrison Ford. It isn't one of those movies that tries to hide the fact that he's old. It embraces it,
and he doesn't either.
No,
which is
yeah.
good. It's a bit like I said in Kingdom of Crystal Skull. One of the things I was glad is that they didn't dye his hair or anything.
Yeah,
the fact that we could see that Indy was getting older. Yeah, even though he looked fantastic in that film, and obviously had the silhouette with the hat and the whip and all of that sort of stuff, which we've come to love. But
and also what's interesting is the first thing Indy does when trying to escape these guys is call for help, which obviously the younger Indy wouldn't have necessarily done. He would have just gotten out of it. But he calls for help. He tries to get the police. He then tries to get police involvement outside. Sorry, I am rushing a bit because I do. One, obviously, we've got to keep this to an hour, and I do want to try and get your opinion on the Flash. But also because I want to get to this parade sequence. Right. And the reason I want to get to that sequence is because I think it actually gives us one of the best moments of the film. And the reason why it's my pick for, I think, probably the best sequence in the film.
Oh, were we supposed to do that?
Well, no, we can. But I mean, just in keeping with the other episodes, if you happen to have one, Keith, go for it. But the whole thing is done against this backdrop of a ticker tape parade for the three astronauts who've landed on the moon. And there's a glorious scene where, to escape these sort of agents who are trying to kill him, Indy climbs on a police horse and goes racing down the kind of New York streets past the three astronauts, and they kind of exchange a look. And what's interesting about that is those astronauts would have been the explorers of their generation. They would have been classed as explorers, and archaeology is a form of exploration.
Oh, definitely. Yeah.
And what you have are these two adventurers, and yet you have the adventurer from the past accelerating past the adventurers of the future. And I adored that scene. I absolutely loved it. And plus, you do get another moment that doesn't really have resonance until later on, which is in order to escape those agents the first time when he's kidnapped. Indy joins in the anti-Vietnam protest.
Which is a bit of foreshadowing, isn't it?
Yeah. And that's what I like about it. You don't really realize until much later on why he does that. And he genuinely sort of excels at that. And you see that kind of wry smile on his face. Because I think Indy's always a troublemaker in a way. And I genuinely love that entire sequence. Did you?
I kind of. Yeah, no, I mean, I was, I was saying to someone, because, obviously I know I was going to come on this as well. And I was like, sometimes I don't think I'm very good at articulating what I feel about stuff when I'm asked like this sometimes. And I think for me, the actual, I enjoyed the ride as much as, I still think 2.5 hours. I think this film didn't need to be that long, to be perfectly honest. But it certainly wasn't as tight and condensed as the other films. But it was 2.5 hours. But I had somewhat mixed feelings. As I said, I was irked and niggled by silly things during it. That's just me. I think it's the filmmaker in me. It's like, I would have done it that way or whatever. But yeah, I agree that sequence was a lot of fun. I had fun during that part of it. But yeah, I mean, I don't want to jump ahead. There's
No, go for it.
On reflect. I mean, I was trying to think about this. Obviously, we've talked about the Mangold versus Spielberg. And obviously I respect Mangold at the end of the day is making a James Mangold film and not trying to mimic a Steven Spielberg film, which is absolutely right from that point of view. But I also think, I'm thinking about this as the series, as the Indiana Jones series, and we've got 2 out of the 4 main creators. Yeah, so we've got Harrison Ford, who brings life. He's the face, the voice, the physicality of that character that brings life to it. And unlike some of his other characters, we know that Harrison Ford loves Indiana Jones and loves playing this role and doesn't want anyone else to do it. And he's had that kind of unique thing of, we've seen Indiana Jones from a young man through to an old man. It's a shame we didn't have more movies in there, to be perfectly honest, but we've got the 5 movies over the, what is it, 40 years? Yeah,
42 years.
42 years. So we've seen that development. If the Young Indiana Jones Chronicles are canon, we know where he's going to be following this film. If those are canon, don't know. But so we've got Harrison Ford, we've got John Williams, who is still an amazing maestro. Still delivers when you hear that theme. It's an Indiana Jones movie, but we don't have George and we don't have Stephen. And I don't know. I felt the film was missing something, and I can't quite put my finger on it. The other thing with this is I'm really and Crystal Skull suffers from this a little bit as well. So we've got obviously CG and digital versus stunts and miniatures, opticals, practicals. And again, it kind of, I don't know, it takes away from, I look at something like Raiders, which was a 1/10 of this budget. Yeah, it probably less, right? All done practically and looks amazing. And I look at this film and I'm like, with all the money this cost, why doesn't it look amazing?
I mean, overall, I liked the look of the film. I think that you're not going to get anyone using a lot of the old school processes now. I think.
But you do, in terms of like Tom Cruise, his projects always use the old processes.
Although Tom Cruise is an older gentleman, he's coming up to his 60s now, I believe, or he is in fact 60. Yeah. He's kept himself in a lot better shape than Harrison Ford.
He's still more than 20 years younger than Harrison Ford.
Yeah, but I mean, I think it's difficult to do that stuff at the best of times. I wouldn't want to see anyone using opticals now, really, because I think opticals always looked slightly bad. And the reason we like them is because we grew up with them.
Okay.
And that's how we came to understand visual effects and special effects. But a lot of them have still tricked us up to this day. There's some where, even we were talking about in the early pods of this, we didn't, notice that some of the stuff in Raiders was optically done. There's some quite nice stuff, and there is an art to it. There is an artistry. There's an artistry to CGI as well, if it's done correctly. And
oh yeah, for sure.
I think that a lot of this stuff, although it can be achieved, I'm not sure it's necessarily practical for it to be done. And the type of directors doing that are the ones whose whole niche and careers are built around doing it practically. Christopher Nolan, Tom Cruise. There are very few now who are out there doing it for real. But I agree, yes, something was missing overall. How did you find, I'm interested, how did you find Phoebe Waller-Bridge in this?
Very unlikable, if
really?
I'm honest. Yeah, because once again we've got, I don't know, a character, because she was kind of filling 2 roles, wasn't she? She was the sidekick and also the sort of she had kind of the Belloc thing going on about, taking things away from him and all of this sort of stuff. But, a prime example here, Henry Jones, right? His whole life work, Henry Jones Sr., this is Sean Connery, his whole life's work, about the Grail, that was all that mattered. But he had to write it down because he couldn't remember it, and that even comes as a plot point. I've written it all in the journal, and he's like, "Well, can't you remember it?" And he's like, "I wrote it down so I wouldn't have to remember it." But yeah, so there was that. But she memorizes all these things. She's just doesn't put a foot wrong. No, I kind of. This was kind of typical. This is what I expected out of Lucasfilm under Disney. This is exactly what I expected, I'm afraid, and they delivered it.
Okay, I'm gonna disagree with you slightly there.
Sure.
Because although yes, you can say that she doesn't put a foot wrong in terms of her kind of pursuit of what she's going after, I think morally she does. I think that's the mistake she makes is morally she just wants, she's not interested in the thing itself, she's interested in the money. And I think you're right to say quite Belloc-esque, but actually more kind of closer to Marion in a way.
Okay.
Because it's not like Marion was interested in where the ark's been for thousands of years.
No,
she doesn't give a shit. She wanted her money back, and I think she probably wanted some closure with Indy, which Helena really wants as well. She's supposed to be his goddaughter, and as she points out, he was supposed to have been the sort of replacement father figure, and instead he kind of, due to the arguments he has with Basil, he disappears out of her life. And and I think that
I thought all the flashback stuff was quite well done. Actually, I did like that. Did like that.
And the kid they got to kind of play the young Helena was.
No, I agree. I agree.
I almost thought for a second if they de-aged, like I genuinely thought, did they de-age?
Yeah.
Her down and just sort of blend her face with another actor. But the kid they picked, I'd be interested to know if that kid was related to Phoebe Waller-Bridge, because she was identical. It was fascinating. I really like Phoebe Waller-Bridge. I can see why she grates on a lot of people, and I can see why there's a lot about her that annoys. But I actually really like her as an actor and a writer. And I think that she brought a lot of charm to this. And I wouldn't mind seeing a Helena Shaw series later on, if they can divorce it far enough from this, because I actually quite like the idea of a sort of more plucky female Indiana Jones character. But I think that would be kind of taking it too far, and I think it should end here. I mean, obviously, you get some other great characters in it. You get I forget the actor's name now. The guy who was in Wolverine, the guy that you felt should play Kyle Reese.
Oh yeah, Boyd Holbrook. Yeah. Well, the thing is, I mean, quite seriously, they bloody cast Jay Courtney, but if they ever make another Terminator movie, which after the last couple, I think they definitely shouldn't, but if they did, and they're looking for somebody to play a young Michael Biehn, Boyd Holbrook is your man.
Okay. Try and stick to this film though. Boyd Holbrook was interesting because he's playing a lot dumber than he usually is. On film, like I always think he plays very smart, capable characters.
Yeah,
and I liked him in Wolverine. Logan.
Yeah.
But You know, I think he's a terrific actor. He was in a really great film called Shadow of the Moon, which
Oh yeah,
yeah, which I think a lot of people haven't seen and really should. It's on Netflix. You take a look at that. But we also get Mads Mikkelsen, and
always good.
Always good, but
Yeah.
I felt the kind of topped similarities in this. He was a genuinely nasty man, and you know he makes that quite clear near the beginning when we see him in the 60s.
Yeah.
You know, he makes the comment to that sort of bellhop or busboy, the hotel, which is infused with a lot of, you know, racial connotations as well as fascism.
Blatantly.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And clearly a man who wants to you know, restart the Reich. And what's fascinating about that is that instantly makes the film very modern. Because the rise of fascism is once again, sadly, a very modern preoccupation.
Yeah.
Can we talk for a minute about the central conceit of the film, the MacGuffin, the Dial of Destiny?
Yeah.
Now this is the point. Yeah. Now this is the point where I think you might lose the audience for a little while, because Keith, what does the MacGuffin do?
Yeah. Well, I mean, you know, so we talked about the different artifacts that Indy's after throughout the films, and we sort of said that, you know, obviously in Crystal Skull we'd gone to interdimensional beings, you know, which obviously Spielberg himself wasn't really that comfortable with, and George had to kind of sell him on the idea and move away from aliens and talk more interdimensional beings. And by the way, if you want to see those stories, they are on the interviews on the home media stuff that they do. But yeah, I mean, this time we're talking about going back. We're talking about time travel in Indiana Jones,
Effectively, yeah.
And features in time, that are caused. But
so the dial can predict points where two times can meet, and you can travel through these sort of passageways in time, which you know, for the audience, we do. We do indeed travel back through time. Now, I felt at this point.
Oh, okay, yeah. I was going to say, before we even get to that, there's a massive problem here that annoyed me. So the short round stand-in, I don't even remember the character's name. That's how unmemorable he was. But the kid,
I liked him. I liked the kid
knocking around with Helena, right? So we have one scene when Indy's trying to get into the, you know, her selling the, you know, artifact for money, you know, scene, the guests only scene, where there's a pilot explaining to him how he flies a plane or whatever, right? Which is probably the most clunky bit of foreshadowing I've ever seen in my life in any, and I believe me, I've seen lots of movies. But then for that to actually come into play and for this kid to pilot the plane, I mean, before we even get into the time travel stuff, that's just ridiculous. I'm sorry, that completely pulled me out. I was like, what nonsense is this? What utter nonsense is this? And you know, why is this not short round? But you know, what I don't know.
I would have liked to have seen at least one appearance from Ke Huy Quan.
I guess they were making this before he won the Oscar, right? But yeah, but to be brutal about it, that is probably something to do with it. But I don't know. I just you know, okay, you know, time travel. Some could say for an Indiana Jones film is a leap, right? I know we've seen a lot of strange stuff, you know, weird supernatural stuff over the course of the adventures, but if the time travel isn't one thing, you know, the reality of the world and the kid being able to fly that plane, just, I don't know, it just really bothered me. I was like, that is so dumb.
It didn't bother me because I think with everything else going on, who cares? Like I thought it was an
they bring Jock back.
I think that's where they missed an opportunity.
Yeah.
The pilot that had fallen asleep in the plane that
Exactly.
we see in the middle of the sequence, that should have been Jock.
Yeah.
That should have been. Do you know the story about him in Jurassic Park? With the production of Jurassic Park. So during Jurassic Park, there was a hurricane that struck the island of Kauai in Hawaii.
Right.
And they had to fly the cast and crew out.
Okay.
And they were trying to organize planes. And they met, I think it was Kathleen Kennedy, met this pilot who offered to fly them out. And he went, you don't remember me, do you? And she went, no. And I think he might have said to her something like, come on, show a little backbone, will you? Oh, because he, as it turns out, he was the guy that played Jock in Raiders of the Lost Ark. And he flew some of them out.
Wow.
During the hurricane, or just before the hurricane. When they were making Jurassic Park. So I think they missed an opportunity to have him on.
Yeah.
However,
it's kind of like, you know,
it can't all be. So much of these films is built on nostalgia. Can it all be, you know, especially when you're dealing with a late sequel like this, can it all be that nostalgic? I don't know, because I mean I was railing against this on the other pod, on the Flash pod, which was, you know, we're now just watching films about other films, and there's got to be a limit. There's got to be a give and take. As much as I would have liked to have seen Short Round make a reappearance, the time travel thing. Now, I initially was a bit, you know, what the fuck during that scene.
Well,
however,
it's not even just the time travel. It's what actually fucking happens. I'm just like,
so.
Oh my god!
We travel back accidentally to the time of Archimedes. So Schmidt is trying to get back to to World War II, to a pivotal moment in World War II. And his plan is actually to kill Hitler and basically take over the Reich. Right? That seems to be his whole thing. So he's a real dyed-in-the-wool Nazi. Who kind of believes it was Hitler's leadership that lost in the war. Now, Indy points out that he hasn't accounted for the continental drift of the world and the continents, and therefore is not going back to that time. They were going to go back to the wrong time, but we end up, as luck would have it, at the point where Archimedes is building the Dial of Destiny. Now, I think, in a way, I had a lot of problems with this initially, but having now had a bit of distance from it, I think it serves two purposes. One, I think thematically it makes absolute sense, because Indy's a person who has delved around in history, or the remnants of history, and the artifacts of history. So it made sense for him, even momentarily, to become part of history. The other thing I felt it did, which was important, was it gave us a really beautiful ending.
Well, if that was indeed the original ending, because, you know, John Williams let slip in some interview at one point that they'd actually filmed a completely different ending for this.
Do you know what that ending was?
Well, I've heard rumours, which
go for it. Can you?
The rumours I've heard, and again, I take all of this with a grain of salt, okay? But the rumours I've heard were that he basically stays in the past and essentially gets erased from history and replaced with Helena Shaw's character.
Okay.
That's what I've heard, and quite frankly, it wouldn't surprise me.
Okay, would you have preferred that?
No, God, no. I mean, for all my, because on reflection, I've got a lot of problems with this film. You know, even though I enjoyed the experience of watching it, you know, how special these films are to me, and trust me, we've only scratched the surface when I was talking about how special Raiders is to me personally, you know, and how it's kind of made me who I am today and sent me down a path that essentially led to nothing, but still, you know, it sent me down that filmmaking path and all this sort of thing. But if they had done what they've done with other franchises and actually, you know, killed the character, or because we are spoilers here, right? So you know, he doesn't die, and I'm pleased he doesn't die. And I will say that the scene that we get when he gets back from this and what the movie ends on is a wonderful scene. Although I have a nitpick with that as well, which we'll come to. But I am so glad that that's not what happened. And I don't even know whether that's just a rumor thing. It might be complete nonsense anyway.
Now, before we get to the end, we do have to talk about somewhere in the middle of the film. There is a sort of confession from Indy where, you know, Helena asks him what would he do if he could. If he could go back in time.
I like the line. Yeah.
Yeah. And he says that he talked to his son and convinced him not to sign up for the army.
Yeah.
Because it's then revealed that Mutt, and the reason why we don't see Shia LaBeouf's Mutt in the film is that he's gone out to Vietnam and he's been killed.
Yeah.
It's an incredibly moving moment. I think thematically,
this is the catalyst as well as to why him and Marion have split up, which when you know that and it puts a bit more context on, it's a little bit more satisfying than the setup that we get at the beginning.
Well, this is why I always think you should wait until you've watched the whole thing it's all, for me, it's always the feeling you're walking away from the film not
definitely
the feeling you're going into it that matters. And I think that that really kind of speaks volumes about the relationship with Helena and how that plays out. I think that really works well for the kind of action sequence that we see earlier on, the ticker tape parade. I think that gives that new resonance. And I think it works really well for the Marion Indy relationship. And I loved that. I thought that was fantastic. But also,
meeting Archimedes was did you not think that was a bit of a
yes? However, I feel that was all in service of giving us the next scene, the ending. And I think it's most in that scene where Helena becomes Indy's daughter in a way. She truly becomes the progeny of Indiana Jones, because whilst he's in the middle of saying, leave me here, I'm going to stay, I'm going to learn more about history, or, you know, he's escaping his own future, the future he knows that's already happened. She punches him out.
Yeah, and I know people who have got a massive problem with that, by the way.
I don't. I feel that's exactly
it's what needed to happen, wasn't it?
Yeah.
But I know people who don't like that.
Yeah, I think it's exactly the right reaction. And also, once the scene is happening, you've got to kind of buy into the time travel. I
Mhm.
don't like it. I would have preferred the time travel to have been just a brief moment where they kind of come out of the clouds, see the Roman centurions, and we get a few close-up shots of what's happening. And we know that the reason we've seen those kind of Archimedes drawings of this giant dragon is because he's seen this plane, and that's just how his brain translates it. I would have preferred that they just briefly see what's happening and then go back up into the clouds and get back through the passageway. And that then the sort of final battle, if there was to be one, between Schmidt and Indy would have taken place on the plane, or alternatively, that Schmidt kind of sees that he's failed and actually just stops and realizes that might have been more interesting from a character point of view to see this guy completely fail and ruined by his own, or even not to completely fail, but ruined by this sort of limited success. And maybe then have Indy stop him, or Helena stop him, or kill him, or whatever. But I feel that given that it's a character who has explored history, that Indiana Jones is a character who's explored history and lived through all these insane things happening, that ending kind of would have made sense if he had stayed. The choice to stay in Archimedes' time would have made sense. I still like the fact that she punches him out. I still like the fact that we end up back in the 60s.
I like the.
Yeah.
I mean, I'll be honest. I know this won't be a popular comment with you, but for me, that end scene with Marion, that's better than all of the Marion in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. For me,
it's a lovely scene.
It's a lovely scene. I think it's well acted. I of course love the callbacks, the nostalgia thing, but I love the callbacks to
Beautiful.
the Lost Ark and their exchange. The only thing that ruined the whole thing there for me was I don't know what Disney's obsession with this is now is okay, we all know that they do iris wipes and whatever as transitions, but they've got this thing now about shrinking the iris down to a pinhole and focusing on something to end on. They did it in The Mandalorian and then they did it in this. And I'm like, what the hell is that?
I think that's a Lucasfilm transition, isn't it? That comes from
well, a transition, yeah, but it's not used like that. It's used to go from one scene to another. Not
well, I like
it's a that's all, folks. It's kind of like what?
Well, there is a sense of that.
Yeah.
There is a sense that we're all dealing with live action cartoons in a lot of films.
They did it. I found it jarring when they did it with The Mandalorian as well in the last shot of season 3. And they did it with this, and I was just like, "Oh, okay." They don't do the transition from the bloody Paramount logo, but they do something jinxy like that, and it was just like, okay. But the scene was lovely. And I'm glad that Ian Marion, and also I'm glad that it wasn't the end of him. And weirdly, and this is just a sad O'Keefe thing, but. I almost wanted him at some point in the end there to like get something in his eye or something to explain why the old Indy has an eye patch when we see him in the Indiana Jones Chronicles.
Well, yeah.
But
I saw someone online sort of jokingly complaining about no freaking way does he end up looking like this with the picture from that scene from the young Indiana Jones.
Hold on, there's still another 20 something years before he gets to that.
I mean, overall, I felt this was a fitting end to Indiana Jones.
Yeah,
it may not be the end you want. It may not be the best ending.
Well, he said,
but it is.
because
Sorry.
I did.
Yeah.
At least I didn't kill it. I did actually think, particularly with trends that have been happening with characters both played by Harrison Ford and other actors over the last few years, I thought, are they gonna finish it up and kill him? And they didn't. And
Well,
I'm thinking about that.
I
And I
think
think Harrison might have had a say in that, actually.
Oh yeah, definitely. I think he would have fully exercised the kind of power as a star that he accrued over these decades and gone, well, I do want this, but I don't want that.
Mm-hmm.
I find it really kind of interesting that he went for such a kind of goofy, moment, action moment at the end to kind of close the film out on.
Mm.
I don't know what the thinking was there, but I don't know what I would have preferred. Given if you take all the film up to that point and then take that out, I don't know what I would have preferred beyond, as I said, perhaps they just see the battle taking place and that's enough.
Maybe.
And that's enough.
I'll be honest that, on reflection, did I have a good time watching this in the cinema? Obviously saw it on the super screen, so a nice big screen, full cinema.
Yeah.
Did I have a good time watching it? Yes.
Me too.
Okay. Do I think it holds up on reflection? Not really. I think there are some scenes that are great. I did like the opening with the de-aged Harrison Ford. I enjoyed that. I thought that was a great sort of, no pun intended, but tip of the fedora to what had come. I liked some of the action scenes, particularly the one you pointed out, in the subway with the horse and all of that sort of thing. Great. And I liked the ending between him and Marion. But a lot of the stuff in between, I mean, we haven't even mentioned Antonio Banderas as Ronaldo and the
that was good, but I mean that whole sequence actually I really enjoyed.
Yeah, but did we need this movie?
Well, I think part of the problem is that because the audience found Crystal Skull so kind of unsatisfying, the goal was to get something that was going to be satisfying. Whether or not they've got that, I don't know. But
whatever. I think the big problem that Disney and Lucasfilm and everybody has with this is just this. This film has to do really well with that ridiculously monumental budget production budget that it ended up having, and it's do I want to see more things in the Indiana Jones universe? Not really. Do something new, for God's sake. Honestly, I am really starting to feel like that now. It's like, I just wish, if I could go back in time and change things for Indiana Jones, I just wish that everybody's schedule had lined up, that we'd got maybe more Indiana Jones films in the last 40 years than just the 5. But unfortunately, that was life. They've all. Lucky enough to have massively busy careers, and the dots didn't line up.
I think 5 films in a series is enough for any series. Even though hopefully in a week or two we'll be talking about the 7th Mission Impossible film.
Yeah, well, you think that's 7 over what? 94, wasn't it, or 96?
96.
So over like 30 years, then there would have been 8 films, right? But then again, you look at something like I saw Fast X a few weeks back, and it's like, my God, we've had what now? It'll be 12 films over 24 years or something by the time it gets to the end of it. But that needs to end.
And only 2 of them good. So.
Wow. I kind of enjoyed 7 of them, but the last 3.
Did you like that many? Jesus.
Yeah. Well, for what they were. But anyway, that's a whole another conversation.
It's a whole another pod that I certainly won't be appearing on. So Keith, just quickly, I mean, I do want to. We can go for another sort of 20 minutes if you want, because we've gone over the hour, so we may as well head into the arena that Liz, Rob, and I were in, where we did 90 minutes on the last one. So I hope people are still tuning in and still listening. Hit me with your opinion of The Flash.
Well, in terms of 3 hours or whatever it was, 2.5 hours in the cinema, I had a great time with The Flash. Okay. I went and saw it on the London main IMAX, on the day it opened. And, I tried to ignore a lot of the hype and the things going on outside of the movie and all of this. I know it's an absolute production mess. I get that. But did I find it entertaining? Absolutely. It made me laugh. It really did make me laugh. I also thought it had some incredibly moving scenes in it as well.
Okay.
This is the sort of thing that if this film had come out when it was supposed to, which I think was like 2017, 2018, something like that, wasn't it, originally? It would have probably been something unique at that point. But the problem is, this has just been done to death. I mean, first of all, the Arrowverse Flash TV series did this whole storyline in season 3, or I think of that series, season 3, and did it very well. Okay, so it had already happened on the small screen anyway. So that had done it. Obviously, we've had things like Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse, Spider-Man No Way Home, Doctor Strange and the Multiverse of Madness, and Everything Everywhere All at Once, all of which have done these multiverse, time jump films and all of that sort of thing, and done them very well. So I feel that The Flash was late to the party with this. Okay. Again, a ridiculous budget on this. I think the same as Indiana Jones, through reshoots, changes of management, rewrites, visual effects. One of the things I will say is I thought even though I enjoyed the film immensely, I thought the visual effects really needed another pass and another polish, because they did not look good at all. I thought the CGI generally on this was quite bad. And I know hundreds of people work really hard on this stuff, so I'm not trying to take them away from that. But some of the excuses that the filmmakers have been making about how it looked intentionally bad, I don't really buy that at all. I think, no, basically someone high up in Warner Brothers drew a line under it and said, enough is enough. We spent 300 million on this film. We're not spending another penny, so that the visual effects didn't get their final pass. So I thought some of that looked a bit hokey, unfortunately. And, I say that obviously we also saw Transformers Rise of the Beasts, right? Which I don't know whether doing, vehicles that turn into robots and, or mechanized animals or whatever is easier than organic stuff. But obviously, there are films being released with good CG and films with bad, and that was kind of a thing. But yeah, and I have to say, again, whether it's music or films or any type of art, I'm not a real fan of cancel culture, and I think that sometimes you really have to separate the art from the artist.
Yeah.
and
Okay.
mental health issues and all that, I'm kind of respectful for.
Yeah.
But I have to say,
Uh,
what surprised me in this film was Ezra Miller. I thought he was, I thought they were fantastic in this film,
hmm.
with the dual roles, the dual Barry, the young Barry, and the
Yeah, they were.
old Barry.
It was an interesting performance. I found it a bit irritating personally. I mean, I've talked about this quite a lot on the other pod. I mean, my real ire for that film was reserved for Muschietti, really, who I just think is having now watched the two It movies and this, I think is a man who does not know what subtlety is.
Okay.
And yeah, I don't really rate him as a filmmaker. Again, I'm just an audience member. I'm not out there making films, so you don't have to listen to me.
Unfortunately, hey, but yeah,
However, I feel he is as subtle as a plane crash.
right.
I think he's a terrible kind of. But that's just me.
Okay.
I mean,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, for me, I was kind of, as I said, I really enjoyed it. Okay, Mike, seeing Michael Keaton back as Batman, he's our Batman, isn't he? But seeing him back, one of the things I was pleased about is they didn't destroy him. They didn't turn him into just a grumpy old man. They kind of started at the beginning a bit like that, but essentially he was the call to action for this, and still looked great. Great to see the bat suits. They obviously ruined all of that in the trailers, unfortunately. Great to hear Alfred's music. I loved all of that stuff. I liked Supergirl. I thought again, they didn't.
She was great.
Didn't get a lot to do, unfortunately.
Mm.
But I thought, we've got we've done something a bit different here to what we've seen before. Yes, we've got the same color schemes in the costume and whatever, but completely, done completely different to what we've seen before. I liked that. So that was really good. The whole thing with the other universe Supermen, including, Nicolas Cage fighting the spider, and a recreated George Reeves and Christopher Reeves and Helen Slater and all of that stuff. I don't know whether we needed that particularly. I totally see why they did it.
I did talk about in the last episode when we did this last week, myself, Liz, and Rob. The biggest cheers in the film, in the screening I was in, came from seeing Christopher Reeve and Helen Slater. So an actor who's been dead for over 20 years.
Yeah.
And an actress who appeared in a film that no one liked, because we remember that film was a bomb. No one liked that film.
Yeah.
Really. And then for Nicolas Cage, an actor playing a role that he never played in a film that never got made, in an action sequence,
infamous.
in a scene that was infamous.
Yeah.
Because no one wanted it, and everyone thought it was a terrible idea. And as like Liz and Rob did point out, they feel it was kind of fan service, giving the fans something they really wanted, etc., etc. Now, I'm not going to sort of retroactively disagree with them, although I did at the time, And this is not me kind of slagging them off or slagging off their opinion. But I left myself kind of wondering, what do audiences want now? What are we watching? And
okay.
I mean,
in terms of cameos And again, there may have been all sorts of legal reasons why they couldn't do this. But personally, I would have liked to have seen Grant Gustin as the Flash.
Yeah, me too. Absolutely.
Simply because Ezra did appear in their version of Crisis on Infinite Earths, yeah, and he actually gets the name the Flash from the TV's Barry Allen,
right,
in that scene, in that multi-part episode where he appears in, because they do the whole multiverse thing again. They've done that. They've done the, Brandon Routh coming back as Superman and all of that. They did it, 6 years ago or whatever on TV. They did that. Greg Berlanti did that, on the CW. So they've done that, and I would have liked to have seen, Grant Gustin appear in this somewhere. That was one thing I did think was missing. But yes, the last act does just turn into a little bit of a CG fest fight. I preferred the stuff I really enjoyed was all the character stuff, and I did like some of the comic timing, like when Iris West comes to his apartment and she says, "Oh, I thought it would be a lot messier than this," and then instantly the cupboard opens and all the junk falls out and everything. I was amused by stuff like that. I like the fact we see the rest of the Justice League, because obviously, the Snyderverse thing isn't going to continue, and that's a whole nother argument. I was kind of pro the Snyderverse, to be honest, but that wasn't going to happen. And obviously, what I was sort of expecting from this, because I know there were some reshoots since James Gunn has sort of taken the reins for the franchise. They actually did go back and they changed the ending. And I had to say I chuckled and what a good sport. I loved the Clooney Bruce Wayne thing. The only thing I wished is that he'd shaved for it, because Batman is known obviously for the only bit of his face you see is his chin, right? And Clooney should have been the Nespresso Clooney, not the bearded Clooney. But good on him for doing that. It does raise that question though, right? So I've heard that one of James Gunn's plans is to do Batman the Brave and the Bold, which is going to have a young Damian Wayne stroke Robin with an older mentor Batman. Does that mean that George Clooney is going to be the older Bruce Wayne, or is this just
I think this was just a fan service cameo.
Yeah, okay, well, fair enough if it was. I mean, to sort of give some credence to the worst Batman movie ever, and the fact that he came back to do that, good on him, good on Clooney for that. I had to say I laughed out loud at that, although I was kind of disappointed that means Batfleck is completely cancelled now. He's written out of history completely.
Well, these things are very flexible, as we know. So you don't know what's going to happen.
There's no stakes, is there? That's the trouble. There's no stakes anymore. And it's funny, even the thing about the emotional heart of this film, which all the laughs aside and the spectacle aside, I actually did think, even though I know it's been done in the comics, it's been done in animation, it's been done on TV, but the sort of thing about Barry's mum and him having to essentially, she's that fulcrum in time, she's that fixed point which he has to let her die, and as emotional as that is, obviously his moving the tin in order for his dad to look up and get exonerated. By the way, his dad is the Rachel Dawes of this franchise, played by, like Katie Holmes got replaced by Maggie Gyllenhaal, and they did it here. But obviously they turn that into a joke because that's what changes the timeline, so that Clooney as Bruce Wayne at the end. But again, they did this in the Arrowverse a lot more effectively because they had Barry had to fix things in that as well. But when he did, some of the ripples, some of the changes meant that the character John Diggle, who was actually created for the Arrowverse show, originally he had, I can't remember which way round this was, he either had a son or a daughter, but when they came back, he had, if it was a daughter, he had a son. If it was the son, he had a daughter. I can't remember which way they changed it, but that had ongoing repercussions to the storyline and Barry's guilt, through the following seasons and stuff. So, and there were other subtle changes as a result of it. So, so I don't know. I feel like I'm waffling a bit, but I'm just trying to get out the things I had to sort of say about this, because I did have a good time at the cinema. I did think, despite the fact that this is, by all accounts, a flop, a bomb, because of the amount of money that this has cost and all the bad press around it, and the fact that they were years late to the party. I mean, literally years late to the party. I know it's a damp squid from that point of view, but did I enjoy it when I watched it? Absolutely. So there you go.
There you go. I think that's a perfectly sort of fine reaction to have. I don't agree.
I know you don't. I heard your review.
Yeah. But
quite scathing from your side.
I'm also willing to acknowledge, as I did on that pod, that, given the age I am now, and the other movies that I'm kind of interested in outside of this comic book stuff, that I am beginning to wonder, am I the right audience for this stuff now? Maybe I need a refresher. Maybe I need to go off and find my joy, because I mean, you always used to do this in the comic store, because you used to get a lot of people who would work in comic stores, and sometimes their attitude over the week's comics would be, well, it's all shit, isn't it? And I used to have a real problem with that. Yeah. Because it's just like, no, it isn't. You need to go off and find your joy. You don't have to recommend everything wholeheartedly, but you need to find your joy.
Yeah.
And perhaps this isn't it.
No,
I think I am a bit comic movied out.
Right.
Just slightly.
Well, I mean, there's two things here. There's the comic movies themselves, but just generally, the whole multiverse concept seems to be a bit of a fad at the moment. I know it was done years ago in literature and stuff.
No, I think.
But the trouble with it is, once you've got a multiverse, you've got a license to say that everything is canon and bring back whoever you want.
Yes,
right?
And no. I do want to just quickly, because we are running out of time.
Yeah, I know.
I don't want to go over 90 minutes. The multiverse concept has a ton of life in it. I think there's a bunch of different things they could do. I think some of it can be a bit lazy, but we talked about that way back when we were discussing the kind of Crisis on Infinite Earth stuff for the Arrowverse, which we did.
Yeah, did those ever go out?
I can't remember.
Go out? I know we recorded a load of stuff, but I think.
Yeah, do you know what? I can't remember. I think they're there somewhere. I will try and dig them out, Keith. I will try and dig them out.
Because we went. It was around the whole controversy about Batgirl and stuff, and we really went into it, didn't we? I remember.
I can't remember if on one or two of them there were technical problems and they ended up not going out because of that. But I'll try and find them and see what we can do.
Because we do sort of deep dive the Arrow. I mean, I tuned out of the Arrowverse about halfway through its 10-year run anyway. But yeah.
Yeah. Okay, we've got to wrap it up. So, Keith, thank you very much for taking so much time tonight and giving us your view on Indiana Jones and Dial of Destiny. It's been a really fun series to look at, to go back and revisit these movies. They've been so much fun to rewatch, and I really kind of want to thank you for taking that journey with me and doing that. Hopefully we'll be
this stuff.
good. Hopefully we'll be back for Mission Impossible in a week or two. That movie comes out 10th of July, and then we'll see you soon on the Comic Crush. You can find Keith at Home Media Minefield on Instagram, at Home Media Mine on Twitter, and you can find the Home Media Minefield page on Facebook. And most of all, you can tune in to his YouTube channel where you'll find unboxings, film reviews, Blu-ray and DVD reviews, 4K reviews, tech specs. You'll find guides to 4K technology and other Blu-ray tech on there. You'll find loads of shows like this where Keith discusses iconic pop cultural series and a few non-iconic ones, a few kind of ones that you may have forgotten over the years. But it's a great show. Do subscribe. Obviously, do like, share, and subscribe this as well. I'd love for you to subscribe to the Comic Crush YouTube channel and all the stuff we've got coming up later this year. But thank you for tuning in. Have a think about the Patreon and the web store. All that stuff's there for you if you like comics. There's some great stuff on there at the moment. Thank you very much for tuning in. Goodbye.
Thanks. Bye.